All right, so welcome to AQAvit Meeting, January 27th, 2021. And we'll start off the agenda here with a quick note from Renfei on the JDK vendor item. And what is that?
Yes. So I'm gonna share my screen just to talk about the JDK vendor.
Sounds great.
Yeah. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have a recent PR about add JDK vendor in TKG. So the usage is like JDK info or subset or like the other elements we used in the playlist.xml. We can just add a JDK vendor and to specify the test to only against the vendor we specified. We can add multiple vendors, such as we add multiple JDK impos, which means the test can be run against multiple JDK vendors. And we have a set of JDK vendors. Here is the set of JDK vendors. The values we can be used to specify the test, like IBM, Eclipse, AdoptOpenJDK. And if the vendor is not contained in our list, we will set the JDK vendor to the java.vendor property value. So for example, if there is a new vendor tries to run the TKG and our test, and the JDK vendor value will be set to the java.vendor property. Yeah, I think that's it. I will update the documentation about the set of vendors we have and how to use JDK vendors. So, yeah.
Yeah, and thank you for finishing that work, Renfei. There was a particular use case for the Alibaba team. They have a feature that they've added OpenJDK test for in their OpenJDK fork. And so they will use this right away for that. And for some of the build and packaging tests that we'll add into the build repo, we'll utilize this vendor tag in the playlist to say that I can use the same set of build and packaging tests, but for different vendors, the values might be different that we expect back. So this is very timely and useful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, cool. Next up, we have Morgan. And Morgan, I invite you to share your screen or however you want to talk about. This is kind of a major item that you've been working on, right?
Overhaul. Yeah, it's been on the go for quite a while, at least since October. I'll quickly share my screen.
Great.
Hopefully this will work, because before it previously hasn't.
Well, if you need me to share anything, let me know. But here
can you see it?
Yeah, it's coming up. Great.
All right, excellent. So I've been working on a big feature OpenJDK build for mostly this issue, which allows other vendors, such as OpenJ9, to use our build scripts and essentially replicate our build environment from their Jenkins instance. The need for this came from Adam Rosau of the OpenJ9 project, who has a few changes he'd like to make in the configuration files regarding node labels, architecture, any of these values, essentially. But he found issues with it implementing it on our instance because, of course, he'd have to fork our entire repository and keep it up to date, as it were. So I've been working on this pull request, which will make the build scripts able to be a lot smarter and pick out which parameters to pull in that it needs. So this is also useful for testing new changes that come to the OpenJDK build repository, because someone can literally just take the regenerators, build their own small sandbox environment and test whatever changes they want to make there. So I'll just quickly explain how it works, just as sort of a heads up for what might be coming soon, since the issue is quite long. At least for each file's change, that's probably going to go up.
Wow.
So but it's nearing its end. I mean, just documentation and general cleanup changes now. There is a checklist comment in here somewhere, but it's a little buried. So the whole pull request revolves around this file, which is a default JSON file, which lists all the standard locations for paths, config files, scripts, whatever is needed, that the pipelines will need. So I have written some documentation to explain this, which you can look at on the issue as well, but essentially explains exactly how the parameters will work, what hierarchy they have, which order they go in, and how to exactly build your own excuse me, your own pipelines, generators, and everything else from scratch. So I'll quickly show this in action. I won't build a whole pipeline, obviously, but I'll run the generators because they take about 30 seconds to do. I've cloned the OpenJDK build repository in my own little fork. This is more or less up to date with the main upstream branch, except the main difference is that I've changed the defaults and added in a test location containing modified configuration files just to show that it's building correctly. So, for example, I can go into the nightly files, check out JDK8, and I've only got these platforms in there, whereas the other one has Solaris, S390X, AIX, etc. And the defaults have been updated accordingly, along with even the Jenkins details are in here, a repository branch, and then all these different values. So I'll quickly run this. This is just on the Adopt Jenkins server in just a custom build job. So this is the job that generates the top level pipelines. So get so I'll quickly show the output of one I instantiated earlier. So the way this works is that these values will match up with the defaults shown before. And these values will supersede the defaults in this file. But what is interesting about them is that if it cannot find said default in here, it will check out to Adopt's repository and pull in that value. So say if you only changed the job template for the pipelines, then you can copy the pipeline template to your repository, update its location in the defaults, and then you don't have to copy over anything else. The script will pull in the values, pull in the rest of the parameters. So it will recognize that you haven't got a nightly folder path in your repository, so it will check out to adopt OpenJDK build and pull in its own value, which I think is pretty useful. Since you don't have to keep everything up to date, you just have to ensure that the files that you have changed are maintained. So I don't think there is an example of it happening in this one, sadly. But the point is there. I'll be showcasing this a bit more as the week goes on, but the main part of the code is done, as it were. The documentation is still undergoing work, but I'm hoping it will be finished by the end of this week. And if there's any questions on it, I would really appreciate them because here it is. Here's an example. So it checks if the JDK18 config is existing in the user's repository. Then it tries JDK18U, since that's our naming convention. But once it can't find either of those, it goes, okay, we'll just check to see if Adopt has them. So it checks out to Adopt's repository and then finds we don't build JDK18, so it just skips the regeneration. And then it does that for all the pipelines and generates them in the location here. And they all point towards the user's scripts, parameters, etc., along with their defaults. So that's it. If there's any questions, I would very happily appreciate them.
Yeah, and I see we have Adam joined us as well. I'm gonna.
So I guess I'm supposed to ask questions.
Yeah. I think you were
Yeah.
part of the reason the requirement exists.
Yeah.
Your role or your tasks ahead of you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if I understand correctly, I'll need to create a new repository. It doesn't have to match the sort of directory structure that the adopt one uses, but then I would only keep the files in there that I need to change. So I'd basically take the adopt files and then modify them the way I need to. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct. And like you said, you don't need to have the same directory structure. The scripts are smart enough to recognize if you've used your own scripts and will check out to your repository or check back out to adopt and just slot values in where they're needed.
Okay, that's good. Towards the beginning, you said the platform configurations. So that's good. Particular for Mac, I have some small changes. Now, I'm guessing if I only have like one line code change in the Mac file, I'm still going to need to keep that entire file reasonably in sync with what Adopt uses.
It depends. It depends on the changes that Adopt push in. It's more if you've changed one line in the Mac file, that you can specify which configuration to use in your defaults. So if you have only changed one file but you don't need to use it for one instance, then you can disable it and use adopts or vice versa. But yes, if you duplicate any files into your repository, it'll be up to you to ensure that they remain up to date, as we can't really do that automatically.
Right.
You had a question around artifacts now at the end of a pipeline run or at the end of each one of the jobs that get triggered. This is wonderful work, by the way. Thank you, Morgan, I know this has been a lot of work. We will eventually work towards at the Adopt project, and I think this is something that all users of the scripts will benefit from, having reproducible builds. So being able to run an entire build pipeline, get our tar.gzip JDK package off the end of that pipeline, and then presumably have enough metadata captured from the process of building it to be able to feed it back in and run the exact same build with all of the parameters the same, and be able to do a diff between the first run of that pipeline and the second run of the pipeline. So the question is really, do you capture some of this metadata at the moment? Because now this is a blend of really what's at Adopt or what's at that base repo, and then what someone uses and edits. So is there a mechanism that we can capture the SHAs and kind of everything that was in used for a particular pipeline?
Well, the SHAs and all of the metadata functionality is rather unchanged, because that just relies on whichever repository you're in. If a user has changed the bash scripts at all and they ask the pipeline to use their bash scripts instead of adopts, then of course the metadata is going to be different. But that should be expected on the user's end, because they've said, hey, I'm using my own scripts. I'm expecting this to be different because I fiddled around with it. Does that make sense?
It does. So I guess if Andrew, I don't think he's on the call today, but if he's going to start to look at what do we have to keep as an artifact to be able to reproduce the exact same build, there's two parts to it, I think, or there has to be a part that captures whatever gets overwritten. That would be because we want the reproducibility feature to be available to people who are overriding as well. So I guess I'll wrap my head around what are the artifacts that we keep as part of the releases in the releases repo. Right now, I know we have a releases file, but I think we're going to end up having also a build info file where we capture even more of the metadata. So it'll be interesting once we kind of get more familiar with these changes you've made, if there's a way we can capture that kind of as we output the product of the pipeline.
It should be fairly straightforward to capture what the user has changed, because the pipelines are smart enough to realize if something has changed.
Yeah, exactly. So for now, that gets printed to console, but not to a file that's kept with.
No, it doesn't get printed to a file, but it does get assigned to a variable and printed out.
Yeah, perfect. Excellent. Other questions for Morgan?
Hi, Morgan. I actually have a question. So does this only generate the jobs for build, or that also triggers test AutoGen job that generated test jobs?
It only affects the build jobs. So up and to the bash scripts, and then after the bash scripts, it affects the actual. I'm getting confused, sorry. So it affects all the OpenJDK build stuff. It doesn't touch tests or installers or signed. They've been left completely unchanged.
Okay.
I have run tests, and it does seem to still work with signing jobs, enable tests, and installers all still on, mainly because they just depend on what artifact gets shoved into them.
Okay, so if the user wants to add a test job after, they have to manually generate them, and then I'm guessing the rest should connect together. So right now, Adopt workflow is the build. Once the build is completed, and then they triggers the test job, right? So I'm just saying that using your alpha pipeline to trigger the build job, and then somebody created the test job manually, and then we trigger the build, and then everything should work same.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think to what you're getting at there, Lan, is, I mean, we can go in still and update the build pipelines to auto-generate test jobs.
Yeah, definitely.
The second phase, which has been, we have
connect that part.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, okay. I mean, we could see if Morgan could part the C's and do everything, but we got to leave some stuff for other people.
My thought was that the test jobs were generated automatically anyway. I thought they had their own generators.
We do, and when we first began, I think we wanted to, because we really only need to generate them once. They don't need to be regenerated on the fly each time. However, there are benefits to doing that as well, and I think that's how OpenJ9 pipelines work at the moment. So it is something we can consider, but it doesn't need to be and isn't part of this set of changes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Cool. Other questions? Any other questions around this one? If not, I'll share my screen and come back to our agenda. There's just a few other items I wanted to hit upon. Thanks, Morgan. Thank you very much for bringing that and raising awareness of those changes for us.
No problem.
So I just had a few other things here in this one, and then I'm going to be pushing some stuff into the next weekend so that we can make sure to close in the 30 minutes we have. But did want to remind everyone, there is a release retrospective. I believe Adam Farley is kindly got quorum and booking a time for Monday for that. And I think there's a conversation in the release channel, Slack channel around it. And if you can't attend the meeting, but you have comments about how to improve our release process, please throw them into that TSE issue. Did also want to quickly mention we've got some upcoming talks related to Aqua JFocus, which I believe is February 2nd. Anyway, the links take you to some of the descriptions of the talks and gives you more details on the dates. And then finally, for today, I did want to introduce the CAN-OSP work that has now been started as of the weekend. We had a code sprint. And for those of you who don't know, CAN-OSP is actually a Canadian University open source program where students from different universities in Canada can sign up, and they treat this this program like one course in their term. So they have enough time allotted every week as though it was like a course they were attending. Sophia and Lan and I spent the weekend in the code sprint with 5 really great students. You'll start to see some activity from them in the test repo. They've already, during the weekend, fixed some things and started work on a feature that is described in, I believe, actually, if you are interested in the work they're doing, we have tagged some of the items with the CAN-OSP Winter 21 tag. And the epic that we are starting with is this issue 2186, which is a way for us to look at change-based testing for pull request testing. Starting with the pull requests that we do for the test repo, and then moving into pull requests based on OpenJDK changes and OpenJ9 changes. So I don't know, Lan, if you or Sophia, if you wanted to say any other words around that or some of the initiative.
Since Adam is on the call, I was basically, so some of the change that we did over the code sprint is the part 0, which is command line triggered, the work Git workflow to trigger an Aqua. So basically, we can, once we polish this, then we can port it in the TKG repo and OpenJ9 repo as well. Right? Yeah,
no, it's we've made faster progress than we expected to because this is a large effort, and so part of Code Sprint was actually just having the students be able to understand the open source project that they had arrived at. And for those people who are interested, I'll put the link in the minutes once I produce them. But this is after having spent some time on the weekend with our students from the different universities, this is their presentation on what they think our project is about and what we're going to try to tackle this term. So for people who want to, I think it's around 7 minutes introduction from the students to what we will try to tackle in this winter term. Yeah, and I'll say if this program, if it works well and it's a win-win for both the students and the organizers of that program and our project, we will look to continue doing it into future work terms, see what things we can push forward as part of it. Yeah. Okay, so I think that's it for today's agenda. And next week's agenda or next meeting's agenda is filling up. I will be adding also the Da Capo work from Oscar on this one, and I hope people are okay with me throwing suggestions in. So the focus next time will look at a lot of the great system test changes that are happening via Mesba and Simon, and then also some of the performance graphing and work that Oscar's been doing. So did anyone have anything else that they wanted to talk about today or questions? It's open for any other business right now. If not, I guess we can call it a few minutes early. And thanks once again for sharing all the content. And I have to say that we got through the release week last week, we had only really frozen the main test repos for a period of a few days, and there was already such a backlog of fantastic pull requests queued up, ready to be reviewed and merged. It shows that the health of this work and the health of the team and project, we're really bringing improvements in at a great rate. And thank you, everyone, for all the stuff you're doing. So thanks, and I'll close the call if there's no other questions or business. Okay, talk to everyone later. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yep.
Bye.